Hello and welcome to another modelling video. This is Alan from the Mokonoman at YouTube with another model video. Being very close to the Australian Gunpla Builders World Cup, I have it very fresh in my mind. I've also got a lot of people locally or from other countries asking me all around questions, their schemes, ideas, what they are building would go within the rules or somehow get disqualified, as well as other small questions about aftermarket bits, kit bashing, scratch building, and all of that jazz. I've been entering in this competition for several years since it's arrived in Australia, and have been very familiar with the older and recent rules, as well as got a few friends who have been around the scene for just as longer, and been in other sides of it, from winning to judging to observing. So let's have a little bit of a look. A very quick disclaimer: these rules has been taken from the Bandai HobbyNet website. These are the versions specified and laid out for the Australian competition. It can be ever so slightly for others, so still definitely have a read. Read it frequently or annually, as the rules have known to change every year or every few years. Lastly, the judges' decisions are final. It's something you should definitely not go up their nose or against, as it could blacklist you or get you on their bad side. So if they make a decision on the day, it's because they can change the rules last minute, or that you're somewhere in a grey area where they decide that you go into the disqualification hats. Best to learn by it and try not to replicate for future events. Take it with good sport and a good competition spirit. Other sources I'll be using, which will be linked down below, are Master Kawaguchi's discussion and talks in Australia last year and the year before. Even though they are tutorials on improving your models, he talks about visualization and construction where it's relevant to the rules of the competition. They're further insights that you may not necessarily get from these rules. They are translated from another language, so interpreting them can be a bit tricky, though it's best to always take it in the absolute. A bit of a background of the Gunpla Builders World Cup. The Gunpla Builders World Cup has been around for a few years, hosted and run by Bandai, which judge the skill level and finish behind the construction and finishing of the Bandai Gundam product, or the Gunpla model kits, in whatever scale or whatnot. It is hosted in about 15 countries around 4 continents. It's expanding every year, and it's a universal set of rules that's pretty much hosted, controlled, judged by Bandai or the companies that Bandai is involved with that wholesale it or promote it. Previously, it was known as the Bakuk competitions, which was mostly an image board style event where you would submit your photos, and a small event would occur in the shopping centre in your country to display the champion kits and have a finished event in Hong Kong. In later years, the event is concluded in Japan near the end of the year after the Japanese championships, and all the models are displayed in Odaiba, Tokyo. And the grand champion of that event is the World Cup holder. If you wish to enter this competition, generally you have to reside in a country that hosts it, which will be notified by the shops that you buy your kits locally or the local distributor. Bandai HobbyNet website is the best way to locate said information. Rocking up to the event, pretty much with a model that applies to the rules, will get you into the competition. You get 4 categories, which are Open A and B and Junior A and B. These are all classified in age groups. 21 and above is the Open Championship, where you can go for the World Cup and in your country win a seat to be sponsored to go to Japan. and it is the same for junior 11 to 14 years old. Open and A and junior A, ages 15 to 20 or 10 years and below, do participate in the competition, but they're not eligible to be able to travel overseas and go in the main World Cup competition. It's sort of a breeding ground age level to prepare yourself for the next step. This video will purely and only focus on the national competition, the one that's hosted in your country. Be very careful to look for instructions wherever it is posted. For Australia, it is among the Gunpla Builders Australia community, and they will refer you to a website to enter a competition at an event. Other countries, it is a photograph competition where you'll have to photograph your model and submit them or upload it to a certain website. They will have certain conditions and whatnot, what the photos resolution, how many photos, and if they're manipulated or have backgrounds or any of that sort of stuff. The safest way to do that is light up your model with a plain background and take as many photos as humanly possible, covering all details, and avoid any effects, and make sure it's not fuzzy and super clear. It is fairly widely known that the competition itself has a panel of 5 judges, all celebrities from magazines, Bandai, Master Kawaguchi himself, and a surprise guest. There is a similar panel of judges, normally always representing a Bandai representative as well, at the national competitions you will be attending. They judge equally among 3 categories of the construction, which is judging how well you built it, any visible mud marks, seam lines, mistakes from scratch building, and how ambitious and complicated it is, yet how little flaws are visible. Painting and finishing, painting and weathering, how realistic and nice it looks with minimal mistakes, and concept or idea. This is how immersed you can get into the story or the world, the look of the model, what story it's telling, any unique ideas or way it's displayed, based, how the whole thing holds together and in the end just tells the story or puts forward what sort of message you've got behind the model, if it's a diorama depicting a scene or a look at me, I'm a Gundam that's depicting a historical character in a certain style of armor and historical pretense. Idea is where you are mostly going to get undone in the way of disqualification or losing quite a bit of points, even though you may be inspired by a concept or another modeler or another champion. By copying a similar concept or scheme from a past competition or someone you've seen overseas, this is immediately recognizable and something that you can definitely be penalized, even though it's flattery to copy someone that you admire. So just a quick recap. We know what we're being judged on. We have told the difference between the world competition and the national competition that you are being judged upon, as well as who is exactly the judges. You will get a chance to meet or see the judges if you are attending the competition in person afterwards. It is perfectly acceptable and polite to ask for criticism, where you went wrong, where you can improve. The other judges are modelers and would be very happy to provide you with them. They may be quite critical, and it could be a huge blow to your ego or your efforts, which could have taken up to a year. Though be patient, listen in. It's definitely a worthwhile experience that can bring you to the next competition. Following the recap, eligibility. All you have to be is within the country that's holding the competition. Enter your model at the designated time of the event or the photo competition. The model is built by you and you're able to travel to Japan. Very simple. It's just rock up to the event, have a model with you that meets the rules. The rules are pretty much the most important aspects. There's only 4 very serious ones to consider. Following these and you'll be absolutely fine. Then we shall dive into the grey area stuff. The model needs to be made from a single Bandai Gundam Gunpla kit, not necessarily any of the other ones such as the Patlabor or One Piece or whatnot. So stick to Gunpla, has to be a Bandai one. Any of the third party or bootleg ones will get you ostracized and booted out absolutely immediately. The second most important one is definitely one model, and has to be made by you and you alone. Models can come by proxy, but the name of the modeler is the most important aspect. This is one that gets people disqualified infrequently, though they are very, very strict to it. They have a size limit of 50 by 50 by 50 centimeters. Now, the best way to fall into that is owning a yardstick or one of those 1 meter rulers. Measure up, square it up, draw a base. It's very easy to just keep it within that, though if you're going close to the border and building a giant diorama, you have to be absolutely sure it's within them. If you go in, they'll just not consider your model, or sometimes if they're kind enough and give you a tip, you may need to hack or cut a piece off or bend something in place. Being close to the limit is also risky because elements of your model can fall over and an aerial or antenna can just stick out. I've seen that happen a few times, but the people manage to be nice enough to be warned and get straight through. Though it's not a competition of how big you can fit something in a defined space, but more so the quality. So smaller is not necessarily a disadvantage. Now, the last one, and the one that we're going to talk about the most, is considering intellectual property. Now, the Gundam competition, or the idea of this, is you're depicting something that's from the Gundam story, anime, box art, whatever. You're building a Gundam. It may necessarily be one of your own design or idea, and you might project it in a world that's similar to Build Fighters, or something that could be in the storyline that hasn't been explored by canon. Though mixing fandoms and doing some sort of fan art thing can easily lead people into all sorts of problems, and particularly in the way that this language is written, it's not clear whatsoever. So a good example of intellectual property, and I've seen many a times, is doing a crossover of a Gundam and a DC or Marvel superhero, getting a bear guy and giving it the Captain America candy color scheme, or using details and logos of a company, putting the Nike tick on a bear guy, or the Patlabor gun and symbol on a chest of a Gundam, which is a very, very good example. This rule is very strong and very strictly enforced, and this also includes copyrighted material that is also under Sunrise or Bandai associated competitions. They have decided for this round of competition, opposed to previously in the earlier versions or the Bakuk, that anything that suspects of intellectual property is immediately not deemed to place in the main competition or hold a place of first, second or third. So you'll have to be very, very careful that it's not a direct copy in colour scheme, no logos, no pictures, no slogans or text that says something like McDonald's or whatever. If you're doing a diorama or scene, you might not want to depict or include any advertisement or companies that actually exist. Probably focus on faking something or making it all up. A lot of these entries in the competition are used in Bandai promotional material, and they want to use your model to promote their product and not navigate whatever IP you may have actually used. This also includes historical content, so an IP that's very old, a book, a comic, a cartoon, even up to 100 years ago, that you may or may not be aware that be renewed, or something that might be in public domain. This is a grey area leading into disqualification zone. It's stuff I definitely recommend not touching or considering whatsoever, as if they don't understand the reference or get it immediately, and you are deemed worthy for placing at a later date under being scrutinized or investigated, they can come back and ask you to return your prizes or title. That gets a bit salty at that sort of point, and you could lead yourself in trouble and may get you banned from future events or blacklisted. In past, in some countries, they've also asked for evidence that you've bought the kit within the distribution network or from selected shops. So be a bit careful in this area, as that can also trip you up very, very carefully. In the past, resin models, including B Club, has been banned or not allowed because the ease of reproducing it in aftermarket or third-party people recreating or recasting the exact same kit. There is no reference or mention of resin models, and even if you do have an original B Club or Bandai sanctioned kit, I would highly recommend not bringing it in or building it for the competition, as again, that's a grey area leading into disqualification grounds, and it has been mentioned in older Bakuk rule sets, though resin casting is still okay. Now, there's also a prohibition list where it mentions a few things. It mixes and muddies the water between the rules, the national competition, and the world competition. A lot of these are regarding if you win the national competition and you're going to the world competition, you will be in possession of your model. You need to take your model to Japan and display it. It needs to be the same as per depicted in the competition. If your model fails to show up or gets damaged, you'll be disqualified. If you edit, change, repaint your model and it's vastly different from the one from the competition, or you improve upon it, that can also lead you to being disqualified. So that aspect is regarding from going from the state one to the world one, assuming that you have won. Prohibition goes further in counterfeiting. Your Dragon Momoko or TT Honglings are definitely off. Utilizing parts and accessories of those kits on your kits are also no good, including models that are intellectual property theft and not a direct recast or bootleg. So third-party model kits, parts of those on your Bandai kits, if caught, are a big no-no. That's resin, soft vinyl, toys, absolutely anything, unless you're handcrafted the part yourself, or you've CAD'd and scratch built it, or CAD it and 3D printed. That's okay. If you've downloaded something and printed it, or you've just sourced it and slapped it on your model, that is definitely not okay, and will definitely get you in trouble. Now, Bandai did a range of third-party builder parts and all that sort of stuff, aftermarket things. Those are also a no-go. They will get you in trouble. But aftermarket stuff that is okay, will not get you forfeited, are decals, photo etch, rub-ons, that sort of thing, finishing products. Decals are generally okay, so if you get a Federation or Xeon logo from a third party, as per previous years, people have printed their own decals and put it on the model that suits different sizes or whatnot, has been acceptable, though I'm not too sure in the future if this will be overturned, or at a particular event they may crack down on it, because there is a range of Bandai decals and markings, yet that range is definitely limited. I would not mention or go into it too deeply, or at least at the event by loudly bragging or telling people that it's non-Bandai decals. You should definitely be okay if you're discreet until one day it's written clearly in the rules, but don't bring the judge's attention to it. Which also goes into that topic. when you're interacting with the judges, pre-judging, pre-entering, it's best to leave them alone. Don't talk to them too much. Don't talk about your work to them or the other contestants. One of the first things will enact is you becoming humble and outlining mistakes. Someone will say that's very good, and you go, oh no, not really, it's a mistake, there's a problem here, there. If they overhear you, that's some of their work done. They're looking at cutting down all the entries to a few to select the first place. You want to make the job as hard as possible for them and not too easy by pointing out your own faults or what could be disqualified. The reason why a lot of these things are very harsh and critical at being disqualified is sometimes they have to look at 20 to 50 models per category, and some of them can be very, very close to each other. You will bet the judges will be absolutely cutthroat and strict on cutting a model out for the running for first place or first, second, third, be it if there's notable mistakes in the judging criteria, paint, construction or idea, or any of the prohibitions or rules of the size limitation. And if you're utilizing any copyrighted ideas or copying other models or utilizing bootleg parts, if it is a build that's yours with a very original idea, that will definitely get you quite far. Now, going into aftermarket parts, kit bashing, accessories. Perfectly acceptable, highly recommended. They're not very clear on it. We can look at historical past entries and first place winners and get a bit of an idea of this. Now, Bandai has released their own series of the build fighter parts, as well as sheets of bits and pieces, thrusters, little figures, scenic bits, backpacks. But a lot of entries have also chopped up Kota Bakir aftermarket parts, wave parts, all that sort of stuff. There is wealth and wealths of photo etch grills and whatnot, little gems, metallic bits, metal spikes, metal thrusters. You can bet all of that has always been historically okay and utilized. Chopping up model kits by other brands and genres, and utilizing them like little bits of engine detail from a tank or aircraft or car or whatever, and cleverly disguising it to look like it is a component that belongs to a Gundam is perfectly cool. Here, being creative, you have to be careful of the Panzer IV in outer space syndrome. You can't have a part, not manipulate it and stick it on a Gundam because it's obvious that it doesn't belong there. And pro tip, Kawaguchi and a lot of the other modelers, they also model in other scales and interests, and they're very familiar with military and sci-fi genre. They will pick up on it, so you definitely have to be quite creative. So if you're going for that Millennium Falcon idea look on a Dom and having all that chunky detail, stealing bits from 1001 kits, that's not a bad idea whatsoever. Now, I'm not sure if full scratch builds is a thing or acceptable anymore. That is also a grey area. It does ask for a base kit to be included in your build for quite a long time now. So even though you use an inner frame or something and you just put piling on the putty and the junk and the styrene plates and whatnot, that at least gives you a leg to stand on that there is a Gundam in there somehow, some way. Though for concept, Kawaguchi has mentioned in the videos I link below that he likes to see something envisioned, belongs and interacts in the Gundam world, and something that's not ideally too alien, even though some alien concepts and scale changes has been very effective using 35th scale models. Going too far can probably make you suffer a bit in the creative section of the judging. But do remember, the Gundam source material is quite vast, huge, and very, very weird. Some of the older and more obscure stuff, you can definitely find context to include some very creative and some very weird concepts. There are notes regarding other things that Bandai has the rights to disqualify. Things such as nudity, morality, public order, personal information, and anything that may be considered slanderous, racist, or bigotry in any form, political or manner. Generally, anything that's reflected in the real world is something that you want to avoid, but this is the sort of common sense stuff that just makes absolute perfect sense and should definitely be considered, though I doubt anyone would spend the type of time and resources to work on an entry just to be slanderous against a political group, minority, race or individual. Now, going further with this document, there are a few notices. Most of them is just regarding contestants that violate the rules and get away with it and win the regional area, how they'll get disqualified, lose their prices, how to get contacted and all that sort of stuff, and that they may do an investigation and ask for photos and evidence of your progress. There goes more into about copyrighted background and pretty much intellectual property. If you're utilizing a background that's from the picture of your model or some sort of drop down or whatnot, what you need to do. Generally, again, just using something plain is ideal. There's also a note that if your model's been in previous competitions or won, you need to seek permission from the competition owners. It is known that in the West, regarding IPMS and other style of model competitions, that people just go from contest to contest and use the same model everywhere they go, wholesale. This is not necessarily important, well, at least in Australia and the United States. You may want to check in your country whatever the courtesy thing is to do if you're a regular competition goer, but by then you generally have the idea of what is fairly acceptable. It is clear that that's the go in Japan. A few notes about the handling of the work. This can be very, very confusing to someone reading for the first time, and only counts to whoever wins the regional or national competition and heading to Japan. Generally, you win the flights and you transport your model yourself to Japan. You set it up in the competition site and people look at it for a period of time, I think up to 1 year. After that, your model may be retained further and used in shows and other events done by Bandai. Eventually, after a fairly extended period of time, it could be up to 2 years, they will thoroughly box it well and ship it to your home address. There has been stories of damage, which is super rare. Sufficient compensation is gifted, even though they state they don't really have to, and the prizes and compensation you get at the competition itself is very generous. This more or less concludes everything that I'm practically aware of the competition. I've been preparing, attending, hearing, learning, talking to people. It's always big news. It's always very fun to attend. Now, in the end, do not be afraid to make mistakes, and if you do mess up and do get disqualified, don't get too discouraged. It is not a personal thing or an attack. It's simply a fact of receiving a set of rules, be it clear or not, and following them to your best interpretation or understanding, or the interpretation of the larger community or group as a whole. It doesn't hurt to have discussions with a group of friends and see what others interpret and think goes, especially with the more experienced. Always take the time and opportunity to discuss this with a judge at the event if you can get access, previous winners and whatnot. Everyone's fairly transparent and wants your model to be on display, to be seen, to be enjoyed. No one's there really to put each other down, embarrass or do that sort of stuff, so that's something not to be concerned whatsoever. Go in, give it a go, try and learn. You will make a few mistakes, but every year you do it, you'll get better, and next thing you know, you'll be quite experienced in it. So try not to put it off and enter the very next competition you humanly can. if you believe your skill set is in play or not is regardless. In the end, it is a hobby and a very, very fun activity. Now, this is not covering absolutely everything you should be aware of, but these are practically the most important points that can definitely get you in trouble. As you go, you will learn yourself, and there's a lot of discussions and groups that you can also learn from, but this gives you an idea roughly what you need to do. This is considered to be a very restrictive competition. It does consider to be a lot of rules compared to things like the IPMS and other traditional model competitions. They're being run by a brand with a set agenda that can be understandable. It does have very generous prizes. This definitely attracts a wealth and pool of very talented modelers that produces work and a display that is very worthwhile checking out, especially the end Japanese heat. So being involved in it is just really, really worthwhile. In conclusion, this finishes my lecture talk on the Gunpla Builders World Cup and rule set. Roughly what you should be aware of when you rock up or go or enter. When you do enter your model, make sure to bring it in a very secure container. Lots of padding, lots of bubble wrap, a few basic tools for emergency repairs, a bit of paint and a brush to cover anything that's been scratched, and enough documentation. Always register way in advance and ask lots of questions. Bring a camera to record things and talk to as many of the people entering and competing and judging and whatnot, and just get a good grasp. Thank you very, very much for watching or listening. Stay tuned for further content. Have a look in the description section for references. Facebook for a lot more content such as videos regularly posted, pictures, links, other interesting information or references. We've got Twitch. I do streaming very rarely there. Patreon, if you feel obliged to support me in any way. And if you have any questions, drop it down below. Very happy to answer anything in the form of the questions. I do check the channel daily. And that cuts it. Catch you guys next time. This is a revision just before I put out the video. I've talked it among a couple of people and decided that the rules are stated as clear, that any parts used on the Gundam produced from a 3D printer shall have the model being disqualified for whatever purposes. Previous years, it said 3D printing and 3D printed parts were accepted. Obviously, this has changed from 2015 and 16 to today, 2017. This does prove my point that these rules are very, very volatile. They're quick to change as well as very complex. The document is a long read, but it's something that needs to be revisited very, very regularly. Luckily, this does not affect a lot of people. I'm a little bit emotionally biased and hopeful, but in the end, this was my own personal mistake and will be reflected in future videos. Thank you very much for watching, and this concludes the full video.